In this video we will talk about Microsoft Visual Studio and Microsoft Expressions Blend. Expressions Blend comes with the Visual Studio product. It has been coming with it for free since Visual Studio 2012. And when you download the Express version or any of the versions of Visual Studio, you get Expressions Blend with the Visual Studio package. So if you go to your Start menu, All Programs, and we'll go to Microsoft Visual Studio 2012, expand that, and you'll see Blend for Visual Studio 2012 along with Microsoft Visual Studio. OPC Systems works with both products. You can start an application in Blend and then finish it in Visual Studio or vice versa. You can actually have them both open at the same time. What are the differences between Visual Studio and Expressions Blend? Well, Visual Studio is an extremely powerful tool for building applications. Very strong. It's been supported for many years by Microsoft. It's a great application to work in. Expressions Blend is like an add-on to Visual Studio. And when I say that, it's more intended for building your graphical user interface. Everything you can do in Expressions Blend you can do in Visual Studio. It's just a little bit more complicated. And we'll talk about a few of those items. And I don't mean to say that everything that you can do in Blend is more complicated in Visual Studio. There's just a few features there that we're really going to want to rely on for building our user interface. So let's open up Expressions Blend and we'll talk about a few of the differences between the two of them. I'm starting Microsoft Expressions Blend, and we'll just create a new project. Take the default name, and now that we have our project open, we see our main window. So there's a few things that you'll find in Expressions Blend that aren't built right into Visual Studio. Most of those things you can do in XAML code if you want, but there's a few things here that are much easier to deal with in Expressions Blend. The first one is to be able to convert an image to an image brush. And actually it's not just an image, it's anything that you have on your screen can be converted to an image brush. So for an example, I'm going to add a folder to our application, and I'll just call this Images. And we'll add an existing item, browse and pick a picture, and we'll use that as our image. Let's grab an image here. And now I can add that into my application. Now you'll see that that image is a lot larger than my current window. That's fine, not a problem there. But if I want to use that as a background, I'll just delete that and we'll select our grid. And we go up to our background. You'll see that we're looking for brushes here. So we could make that a solid color. You can change that to anything you want. You could also use gradients. There's also tile brushes. But what we're looking for is an image brush. And so there's a standard set of image brushes here that are created with your application. No way really to take that image and make that the background of that grid. So here's an interesting trick. We'll add that image to the application, and you'll see that it shows up in an image control. And we could use an image control, but this way what we're going to do is apply the image to the grid instead of putting a control on the grid. So now that I have my image, it's selected, I'm going to come up to Tools and we'll select Make Brush Resource and Make Image Brush Resource. And I'll just change the name of that to Background and hit OK. And now I'm going to delete that image from my grid and come back over and select the grid, and now we'll select Brush Resources. And there's my background. So now as I size my window, you'll see that that image now fits with my window area. I can resize that. It's the background of the grid. So one good use for using Expressions Blend. Now another thing is our objects and timelines. What's nice about the objects and timelines is you see a tree view of all the controls that are on your application. So I can throw additional controls on there. Let's put a rectangle on there. And the other thing I can do here with my rectangle is I can just grab those bars and change the corner radius of it. I could also rotate that if I wanted to. You can do that manually, and you can also, we'll just cancel that and go down to a tool that's really handy. It's a transform tool, and this allows you to affect a lot of aspects of a particular object on your screen. This transform tool is not available in Visual Studio. So we can set our X, we can translate that X and Y location on the screen. Let's set that to 0. We can also rotate that by a specific amount. Let's set that to 45, and now we'll see that rotated to a 45-degree angle. You can scale an object. So X and Y scale. You can also skew that object. So we can skew that in both directions. And we can set our center point for the object. And you'll see the center point is represented by this little circle in the center. Now, that is really useful for rotation. So when we were rotating the object, and let's just get back to a normal object here. When we were rotating the object, it's rotated around that center. I can take that center point and move that. And now when we rotate the object, you'll see it will rotate around that new center point. Again, these are just things that you can't do very easily in Visual Studio. We can also flip an object, either direction that we want, up and down or left to right. So that can be handy also. So just a few of the features there that are available in Expressions Blend that are not necessarily easy to do in Visual Studio. One of the other things that can be handy is you can actually hide an object and remove it from view while you're working on other objects. You can also lock objects. So now I can't do anything. I can't move this object. So if I'm working with other things around the area, I keep accidentally grabbing this, I can lock that object's position. This is only for when you're working in the development environment, so the locking and the hiding doesn't have any effect on when you're running your application in the end. A view box is another easy thing to add in Visual Studio. We can take our grid and we can change that grid and change its style or change its type. Let's go and select change layout type, and you'll see that we can change that grid to a stack panel, a dock panel, a canvas, scroll view, or border. A view box is a common choice here. So if I change that to a view box, now we have a view box that's taking up our entire screen. And if we set the stretch type back to none, we can now work within that screen very easily. When you're using a view box, it's really best to leave the stretch type, set it none, or change it to none until you're done with your application. If we set that to stretch, which is its normal, actually set it to fill. Let's go back to the view box here and we'll set that to fill. This can be painful to work with now because it's trying to stretch every object within it. So my rectangle is now filling out the whole area of the screen. I can't resize it very easily. So let's go back and set that stretch to none on our view box, and we're back to our original screen. Now when we change the view box, the background got changed also. So there's no background for a view box. So within our view box, another thing is a view box can only contain one control. So let's take our rectangle and we'll remove that out of there, and we'll just double click and add a grid into our view box. Now we've got a grid inside of the view box. We'll just size that. A grid control is a container. That container control, especially a grid, can have numerous items. So now we can add additional rectangles in there if we want, size them and move them around where we want in our screen. So we could add some text to that. So there's a text block. We can also add our OPC systems controls. So a lot of things are available here that make building your user interface easier. Visual Studio is really the best place to develop your code in. Expressions Blend is a good place to develop your user interface, and I would recommend for testing using Visual Studio. Visual Studio will provide you with a lot more information and feedback when you're debugging your application. A few other tools that are readily available here that are not so in Visual Studio, so I'm just going to select our text box here and let's slide it up. And we can select that right there. And let's slide that up in our application here so it's over our rectangle. And you'll notice that you'll see red lines show up around the rectangle for alignment. Now we have our rectangle and our text box inside of the grid. So you get an idea over here on our objects and timelines. We're starting to see a bit of a tree view here. We have our window. In the window there's a view box. In the view box there's a grid, and in the grid we have a rectangle and a text block. So let's go up and select both of those, and we can do that on our screen, on our work area, or we could select them right in our objects and timeline. We can go up and select our objects menu here, and we can order them, bring them to front, send them to back, send a particular one backwards. We can also align by left edges, center. We can reset the layout. Let's go back over here to our line, and we can horizontal centers. So it makes it easy to arrange some of the objects within your window while you're working on them. Let's go over and do one more thing here. I'm just going to select the text block here, and I'm going to go to objects, and I'm going to select order and send to back. Now you'll see that it's now behind the rectangle, and if we look at our tree view here, you'll see the grid is first, text block is second, and the rectangle is third. I could do the same thing here by dragging the text block down, and now it's in the front, the foreground. In Visual Studio, we don't necessarily have the same toolbar that we have in Expressions Blend. In Expressions Blend, you'll find your tools under Assets, your controls. So they're categorized here. By default, you're showing every control that's in the project. We can also select any one of the groups here, styles, and categories. For more information on OPC systems, please visit our website at www.opcsystems.com.